Hello, lively learners. I'm excited to talk to you today about text dependent questions. We started on this previously, and it looks like we need a little bit more work on it, so we're going to um, enrich what we already know. Today, we will be working in session 15 in your digital notebook. It is Monday, the 12th of October. Your I can statement is I can examine text in order to find answers to text dependent questions. And we are going to review the TDQ, what it is, how you write them. We're going to practice writing them. And we're going to read a piece by Frederick Douglass that is an historical piece of biographical writing that really provides us a lot of rich evidential text so that we can answer questions. And due this week, of course, you're going to have to finish this Frederick Douglass activity. And your iReady teacher assigned lesson for Wednesday is going to be a standards mastery. And you need to make sure that you get that done on Wednesday. There is a very small window of opportunity to do it, and you need to have it done. You cannot do anything else in iReady until you finish the standards mastery. So, we're going to have a quick reminder of what a text dependent question is, and I'm going to show you part of this video. You're free to watch all of it. It is really designated as a teacher or an educator video. But in the case of your writing, you're creating questions, you are the educator, you are the instructor, you are the teacher. So we're going to watch a little piece of this, and then you can always come back and watch the rest of it later. All right, I'm going to stop it right there. That's basically what you need to know. Those questions that you ask need to anchor to the text. They need to be specific to that text. Remember the video we saw before about the grocery cart? You could not answer the text dependent questions if you had not read the grocery cart. So it causes you to dive deeper into what you're reading and do that close reading that we always ask you to do. So today, I want to teach you how to find the part of the text that answers the text dependent questions. That is that part that is specific to the response and that cites exactly what you're looking for when you're trying to find an answer to a question. It's important that you know that when you're looking at these questions, you need to be looking at the text. Do not rely on your memory. I've told you several times, your memory, it's not so good. We all like to think our memories are good, but they're not good at the details. Our memories are good for the big picture, but we're honing in on details now. And if you have the text available to you, then why wouldn't you use the text? There's no excuse for that. So we're going to use the text and we're going to respond to some questions. So the two things I want you to really be sure of is that you are precise and you are specific. It's kind of like construction. The details are important. A construction worker has to be very precise in his work or her work. They have to make sure that when they measure, they're accurate, that they are looking at the context in which they're building. And so they know if they're putting something into another space, that they've measured everything exactly right. They've cut it exactly right. They've assembled it exactly right so that it fits precisely where it belongs. That's what you're doing. You are finding the text that fits precisely into your response. So those questions need to be specific to you and your text reading. So I want you to see how we do this today, and I want you to take notes because you're going to need them based on last week. Question one asks why Frederick Douglass is specific about making friends with little boys or little white boys. He doesn't just say little boys, he says little white boys. And he says that that's what he needs to do. He needs to make friends, and he plans to make friends with these little white boys. That's how he's going about his mission. He wants to learn something, and he knows they have what he wants, what he needs. So we're going to ask ourselves, why do it? What do you think he begins this way? Why does he start with that? Why does he start with, I need to make friends with little white boys? And I'm wondering, is there some other way he could have started it? Is there something else he could have done? Why is he so specific to point out their race? So these are two things I want to know. Why does he start the story this way? And why is he so specific to say little white boys and not just little boys? Well, one clue is in the title of the piece. If you look at the title of the piece, it's the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. Well, that word slave says it all. And a second piece of evidence that I can find is that he states that it was an unpardonable offense to teach slaves to read. Unpardonable offense. That means that if you try to teach a slave to read, you could be arrested, you could be fined. There are many things that could have happened to you back then that probably were not so pretty. But under no circumstances were you to ever teach a slave to read. And you'll find out, if you don't already know, later on, you'll find that um, the reason for that is just because what we always say now, knowledge is power. And they did not want the slaves to have power. They certainly didn't want them to be able to read and write. They didn't want them to be able to have an education of any kind. So that was important. So, which piece of evidence do you think is the stronger piece? Do you think that the title with the word slave in it is more important, or that it was unpardonable to teach slaves to read? And in this case, I'm thinking probably it's close. It's close. But I'm going to say probably the first piece of evidence is the strongest, even though it seems like it's the shortest. Just because it's the longest doesn't mean it's the strongest. So, just the fact that he used the word slave. And because he was a slave, we pretty much knew he was not a little white boy. So, why was he making friends with these little white boys? And yes, it's important that he mentions that they're white, but it's because he's a slave. So, I would say that the title in this case would be the stronger piece of evidence. So, when they say, why is he specific about making friends with little white boys? The answer is really he is specific about making friends with little white boys because he is a slave. And that was not something that was commonly done at that time. Little white boys and little Negro boys, as they were called, they did not. They did not play together. They were not friends. So do you see what we did there? We looked at the question and we thought about the important words, okay? You think or wonder about what you've read and you reread for specific details that support your answer. Then you're going to choose the text to support your response. So we read the question and we sort of thought about it. Why are they looking for this evidence? What's so important about this? I wonder what he meant by unpardonable. Reread for the specific details that support your answers. And in this case, we found it right in the title. So we didn't have to go too far to find a piece of evidence. But we need to find a couple of pieces and then we need to weigh them. You need to make a determination of which is the more powerful response. So let's try one more question just for fun. And the next question asks, how did Douglas learn to read while running errands? So again, let's identify the important parts of the question. Learning to read and running errands. Those are the two active parts of the question. The two things that he did. He ran errands, he learned to read. And I know that as a slave, he's not supposed to know how to read. So that's a clue to what I'm looking for now, right? I'm looking to see, how did he learn to read while he was running errands? That's kind of a strange thing. If you think about it, running errands and learning to read, they don't really go together. They're not related necessarily, but he found a way to relate them. So let's look for some supporting evidence. There's a lot here. So here's a quote that says, I converted into teachers with their kindly aid obtained at different times and in different places. I finally succeeded in learning to read. So I'm thinking to myself, they, them, this must be the boys. This must be those little white boys that he's talking about. And he's gotten them to agree to teach him to read, which is really interesting in this case because, again, they knew they could get in trouble. They knew that if they taught him to read and they got caught, they would be punished. But somehow he convinced them that it would be a good thing to do. So the next quote I have is, bread I bestow on the hungry little urchins who in return would give me that more valuable bread of knowledge. So he's using a metaphor with the bread here. He fed them. He brought them food because they were little street urchins. These kids they might have been homeless. They were just running around, but they could read. So he would feed them and they would feed him knowledge. That might be a good answer. And the third one I have is, when I was sent on an errand, I always took my book with me. And by going on one part of my errand quickly, I found time to get a lesson before my return. So he figured out that if he hurried, he could get his errands done, get in a quick lesson, and get home before it got to the point where his master was wondering where he was and thought maybe he was just dawdling in town and fooling around and not doing his job. So when I look at these three pieces of evidence that I've found, again, I have to ask myself, which one do I think is the strongest piece of evidence to answer my question? So if you think back to what my question was, the question was, how did Douglas learn how to read while he was running errands? So how did he learn to do that while he was running errands? So the first piece of evidence says that he sort of converted his little urchin friends into teachers. And the second one says he fed them and they fed him knowledge. And the third one says when he went on errands, he hurried so that he'd have time to learn how to read. So how did he learn how to read? In my mind, I think the most important piece of evidence we have there is that second one, that he fed the urchins, he fed those street urchins, and they fed him knowledge. That to me is the strongest piece of evidence there, because that's saying it all. That is how he is actively learning. And the question is asking, how did he actively learn to read while running his errands? Well, while he was on his errands, he fed the young white boys and they taught him to read. See what we did there? Oh, we went too far. Let's go back one. So before I go on, I want to remind you, when you are answering questions, quoted text is good, However, if you quote something from a text, you then have to explain why it's important. Why does it help answer the question? Don't just throw the quotes in there. Okay. When I read you this quote, then I explained to you why this is important. Why is it important that he fed them and they fed him? You have to explain why you choose your answer. Oops, going the wrong way again. You know me. All right, so now it is your turn, and you are to answer the remaining questions using these practices. Find specific details from the text to support your responses. You should have more than one, and then choose the strongest text. So I should see that you have a couple of pieces of evidence, and then whichever is the stronger piece of evidence, that's the one you put in your answer with an explanation of why it is the strongest answer. If you do not do all of that, you will not get credit for the question. So you need to find at least two pieces of evidence that support your response. Choose the stronger of the two and explain why it's the stronger of the two. Let me say that again. Find at least two pieces of evidence to support your response. Choose the one that is the stronger of the two and explain why it is the stronger of the two. So, as always, if you have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email. I will respond as quickly as I can. And in the meantime, T2 is logging off. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.